These last few months of my life have been incredibly stressful. I had to finish up my master's thesis and prepare for its defense, all while working 3 jobs at the same time. Having to deal with all that at once in my life kept me in a state of perpetual stress, and I realized that if I'm going to be stressed out all the time, I might as well put myself in scenarios where being stressed is fun. That's where I finally decided to dive into the genre of survival horror, and the first game I chose to play, well, it's none other than
Resident Evil.
In the last month and a half, I've completed RE0, RE1, and the remasters of RE2 and RE3. Each of these games was incredibly enjoyable, and while some of them are older, like RE0 and RE1, they still have their unique traits that I think really add to the core concept of survival horror. And in many ways, I think they cemented to me what the standard is for that genre of video games. I enjoyed the first 2 titles in the series so much that I bought almost every single game in the series. And to anyone who knows me well, you might be surprised that I would buy so many of these horror games because I never really played too many myself. When I was younger, I tried playing Amnesia: The Dark Descent because I'd seen PewDiePie playing it. And what I found is that I could not play it. I could not get through even the first chapter of the game because I was just so terrified. More often than not, my parents would end up yelling at me because of how much I was screaming. So I kind of stayed away from that entire genre of video games for the longest time. So needless to say, this last month, I've really found a new level of enjoyment for these types of games. So in today's video, I want to talk about why Resident Evil captivated me so much and why I think it's probably one of the best installments in the survival horror genre. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing I noticed when I started playing Resident Evil was how masterfully they utilized sound design. Every single sound you hear in this game is designed to creep you out. Something as simple as the sound of the creaking floorboards as you walk across it, or the squeaky door as you open and close it. Even the sounds of the mobs were all perfectly crafted to keep you terrified. But beyond the sound effects, the soundtrack in the game is also masterfully crafted. If you were to play one of the themes from the game, I could probably tell you what part of the game it came from. The peaceful, whimsical sound of the safe room that plays to let you know, hey, you're okay, nothing can get you in here, there's no zombies, you're safe. And the ticking of the grandfather clock letting you know that time is running out. You're gonna die. There are zombies all around you. Why are you wasting time on puzzles? Why can't you solve these puzzles? And that's another thing. Puzzles. This game is filled with them. And at first, if you haven't played a game like it, this might be a little bit off-putting. But ultimately, in a game where you're playing as police officers, I feel like it's incredibly fitting because it has you do a little bit of detective work, which helps you get further immersed into the series as a whole. Speaking of immersion, I've already discussed the sound design and the inclusion of puzzles, but there's other aspects of this game that are just so much thought is put behind them to make sure that you are truly immersed in the experience of Resident Evil. One of the first ones is the fixed camera angles. Now, not everyone likes these, but I gotta say, I think they contribute a lot more to the game than they take away from it. The original Resident Evil games came out back when the PlayStation 2 was a modern console, so you have to keep in mind, they were limited by their hardware. But by using fixed camera angles, the team behind Resident Evil was actually able to create high quality pre-renders and overlay those onto your screen, and then have your character interact with it, which led to a game that seemed way beyond its time. And these fixed camera angles also add an element of horror, because when you walk into a room and the camera is facing you and not the rest of the space and all you hear is mobs coming toward you, it's incredibly terrifying. This game knows how to keep you on your toes, and that goes beyond just the fixed camera angles. There's also the fact that as you get used to the mobs that you're fighting in the game, new ones will be introduced to throw you kind of a curveball at you and keep you outside of your comfort zone. A prime example of this is in the original game. When you first start killing these zombies, you feel confident at a certain point because you're just mowing through them, you have a shotgun now. And then out of nowhere, you find out that if you don't burn the bodies, after a certain period of time, they come back as what are known as Crimson Heads. And they're so much faster and way scarier than the typical zombies. This is an excellent way to keep the fear factor of the game high throughout the entire course of its storyline. Because obviously, as you get used to fighting certain mobs, you're going to become less and less afraid of them as you become more familiar with how to handle them. But by throwing unexpected curveballs like new mobs or evolutions of previous ones you've already faced, you're going to be constantly in that state of stress and fear, not knowing what's coming next. Even to a certain point, once you've figured out this formula, you don't ever get comfortable again, because once you're used to a mob, you're just expecting for something new to come out of nowhere and scare the crap out of you. Now, another really cool element of the more recent games like RE2 and RE3 remakes is the addition of what's known as a pursuer. Basically, it's a mob with artificial intelligence that will track you down throughout the course of the majority of the game. This mob will be able to hear you. If you shoot your gun, if you're running around, slamming doors, it'll find you faster. And trust me, that's the last thing you want to happen. In the case of RE2, it's Mr. X, and in the case of RE3, it's Nemesis. The introduction of a pursuer into Resident Evil benefits the game in a couple of different ways. The first of which is, they have to rely less on introducing new mobs to keep you scared, because in reality, pursuers cannot be killed, so no matter what you do, you can't really adapt or get used to them. The best you can do is outrun them, and in some cases, you don't necessarily get the opportunity to do that. And as I mentioned, sound design has a key role to play in this game, and in the case of pursuers, that still holds true. In Resident Evil 2, when you're walking around RPD, you can hear the footsteps of Mr. X as he gets closer and further from you. And I should also mention that prior to encountering Mr. X, you occasionally hear little sounds or groans or creaks, and eventually you learn to kind of ignore these sounds. But with the added element of Mr. X, you're always listening, and those tiny sounds now become just as terrifying as they were the first time you heard them. And in the more modern games, you don't have the fixed camera angles anymore. You have a third-person over-the-shoulder perspective. But they still find ways to design the game in a way that keeps you scared and boxed in, and restricts your knowledge about your surroundings. A prime example of this is in Resident Evil 2 when you're walking around RPD. There's these long, thin hallways with twists and curves, and you can't always see what's looming around the corner, but you can definitely hear it. And when you take everything I've talked about here today and just combine it into a single game, you can see why the result is an amazing survival horror experience. A lot of times too, the game is acutely aware of the way that you're thinking. What I mean by this is that it tries to kind of gaslight you or play tricks on you to make you second guess yourself and the way you play. Another example from RE2 is there's a room with a lamp built into it that shines a light into a hallway that you're in, and you see the shadow of a person coming through the room off of that lamp, and your first reaction is, oh my gosh, there's a zombie in there. I should probably be very careful, approach slowly, and have my gun aimed. And when you turn around the corner, it's just a mannequin. It's a mannequin in front of the lamp that projects that light. But the crazier part is, if you're ever going down that hallway again in a later part of the series, you might see a shadow and think, oh yeah, it's the mannequin, and it might be Mr. X. Mr. X, even on lower difficulties, is surprisingly smart. I remember one time where I heard footsteps, I turned around, and I looked, and I just saw his shoulder pointing out from a corner that he was hiding behind. He stopped moving because he knew I might detect him, and he wanted me to approach him before he started chasing me down. Obviously I didn't, I'm a bit smarter than that, but the fact that Mr. X was that intelligent and that intimidating at the same time, I gotta say, it really makes me appreciate this game all the more. But anyways, that's just my rant in general on the surface level about why I love Resident Evil so much. I've just finished RE3 and I'm going to be starting RE4 pretty shortly. If you guys enjoyed the game series yourself, make sure to let me know in the comments what it is that you enjoy about the game so much. If you haven't tried it out, maybe check it out. These games are incredibly affordable, especially when on sale. Resident Evil 1 was as cheap as $5 Canadian during a Steam sale. So as long as you're patient, you can get these games for a really good price. Even the more modern ones, I think I can get as low as 20 to 30 Canadian dollars, which is next to nothing if you're in the United States. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, and if you're not already subscribed, I'd really appreciate it if you did so. I'm still unsure about the overall direction of this channel, but I know for a fact that I want to try to create videos like this where I'm just talking about the stuff that I'm enjoying or passionate about at the moment. But if you guys have any recommendations in terms of things you'd like to hear me talk about, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll take it into account. Anyways guys, that's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.